is a wonderful event. You're all very wise because you're here. You're thinking. You realize there's something that comes after UVA, and as you think about that, you might be excited. You might be perplexed. You might be terrified. Welcome. This is a day, a session to really help you think things through and meet and talk to actual people who are graduates of our department from several different generations and are out doing interesting things, all kinds of things. You'll find out what I mean in just a minute. Like other liberal arts majors, we equip you with a set of tools and a lot of knowledge. And there are different ways to do this after you, to put that to work after you leave. You can think of it in terms of a metaphor. If you feel like the world out there is sort of like a wilderness, you can start looking and you'll see some tracks laid down. And so it's not such a wilderness necessarily. And you can enter some of those tracks. Or you can say, I don't like to look at any of those tracks. I want to strike out on my own. I've got some tools. I have my own brains, and I was educated at UVA as a government or foreign affairs major, and you have some tools to make your way through that wilderness, and you'll find, actually, it's not such a wilderness after all. People have been here before. There are different paths I could take. So there are different ways to do this, and one thing, you hear this a lot. In today's economy, very seldom does somebody stick with on the same track their entire career. Academics are a little funny in that way. Typically, we'll get on that track and stay with it. Most people do that differently. So one thing you want to listen for is the different paths and the opportunities people on the panel have had. They have clearly struck out into those woods, but took some unanticipated paths, and some quite interesting things happened. So again, welcome. And please take advantage of both what you're hearing and the flash mentoring that comes afterward. Thanks.
And so, speaking of that, here's how we're going to do this. We will have this panel. We're going to begin with Kadeem Cooper, and I will let each panelist introduce themselves, tell their story. I've asked them to speak for 6-7 minutes or so, so you can hear from them. Then we may have some questions for each other, and then we're going to open things up to you all. We'll go till about 1:30. We'll take a little break, after which we will come back for the flash mentoring portion of the program, which is real fun. The alums will come sit among you. You'll have some time with them, and then after some signal, they will get up. You'll stay where you are. They'll go to the next table. All right? So that's what we're doing. But why don't we begin, and you all introduce yourself, tell your story. What do you do, and how'd you get there?
I did not know I was going to go first. I thought we were going to go this way. Yeah, we didn't discuss that. So in any event, I'm probably the most recent graduate on the panel. My name's Kadeem Cooper. I graduated in 2010, so I've only been out 7 years, which is a long time, I know, but it doesn't feel that long. I was a government major at UVA, and then after college, I worked at the Brookings Institution, which is a big think tank in Washington, D.C., and while I was there, I worked on budget and tax policy. So at the time, there was it was called the Simpson-Bowles Commission, and it was basically a bipartisan commission that was supposed to come up with a plan to basically deal with the deficit problem. I have a lot of opinions on that we can talk about, but in any event, nothing ended up happening. Here we are 7 years later, and we're debating a tax plan that will probably add. Does anybody know the number?
5 trillion.
1.5 trillion over 10 years, right? So we're about to add more to the debt. So after about a year doing that type of work and kind of feeling like I wasn't really making an impact, trying to do that type of public policy work in that setting, I decided to go to law school. I went to NYU, did my 3 years there, and kind of had a hard time in law school figuring out what I wanted to do. The great thing about a law degree, I think, is that there are lots of different things you can do with it. It's probably one of the more versatile degrees you can get as a graduate degree. But I think two of the challenges with getting a law degree are, one, nowadays law school is extremely expensive. I had a scholarship and I still had to take out a lot of student loans to pay for my degree. And so financially I had to think about, well, what are the jobs that are actually going to allow me to pay off my student loans in a reasonable amount of time? And then the other kind of challenge, I think, with legal careers is figuring out what the best way to use the law is, like kind of deciding what type of change you want to create in the world, and then trying to figure out what the way to do that is. And I think when you go to a place like UVA and you get a politics degree, you're interested in so many different things. So you're interested in foreign policy, you're interested in immigration, you might be interested in, all the stuff that's going on around sexual assault and how do we address those issues, and racial justice, social justice, all these things. And I think when I was in law school, I was just kind of overwhelmed. Like, do I want to be an immigration lawyer? Do I want to be a public defender? Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? So I just did like so many different internships. And by the time I graduated, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. So I ended up at a big law firm called Paul Weiss. And the reason I chose that was, one, it paid well, and two, it had a really great pro bono program and department. Like the firm was very committed to pro bono. And so while I was there, I just really I was there for 2 years, and I tried to take advantage of the kind of freedom to work on lots of different cases as a pro bono attorney. And so I did that for 2 years, and then I left, and I did a fellowship at Harvard Law School in the criminal justice policy program. And at the time, this was I accepted the job in early 2016. So it was January 2016, and in my mind, I thought, maybe Marco Rubio will be president, maybe Hillary Clinton will be president. Either way, like, I could see myself working in one of those administrations. 9 months later, I'm like, Donald Trump is president. Jeff Sessions is Attorney General. And in law school, I was very passionate about criminal justice reform issues. In my view, Jeff Sessions is like the exact, other side of the issue for me. And so I really had to rethink what I wanted to do after my fellowship. And so I've ended up back at a law firm, a different law firm now. I work at Covington & Burling. I kind of chose that firm because one of the people that I really admire, Eric Holder, is a partner there. And he's doing some work around redistricting reform that I've been working on at the firm. And I'm kind of still trying to figure it out. I do a lot. My private practice is product liability work. So right now I'm representing, it's confidential, but in any event, I'm representing a large company that is accused of negligence, and the plaintiffs on the other side are very poor people who suffered very horrible injuries, and it's a tough case to work on. I always thought I'd be working on the other side, but the pro bono work I do really keeps me happy. And I've really learned that even big corporations need lawyers. There are lots of cases I've worked on behalf of big corporations, and I felt like they were in the right. So I'm still figuring stuff out, but I can relate to all of you who are in college and still trying to find your way. I don't think it gets easier, unfortunately, but you'll survive. You'll get a job that pays, allows you to live. So don't worry about that.
But an optimistic vision. Jason.
You'll live. That's what you got. You'll live. So you started by saying, it's been 7 years and it doesn't feel like a long time. It's been 29 years for me and it doesn't feel like a long time. And I'm going to prove it's 29 years because if you look over at that cabinet, you'll see things that you've never heard of at this school for a number of years. They're called bowl games. I was at both of those. That's the Peach Bowl. It's there. Citrus Bowl, that was a blast. It was in Orlando. We had a great time. We went out to Disney World. The whole thing was loads of fun. So first I'll start with where I am now, then I'll kind of work my way backwards. My name is Jason Steinbaum. I graduated in '88 from the college. I was a foreign affairs major. But today I am the staff director for the minority, the Democrats, on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. So here's how I got there. I was a student here. I started in '84, and I knew this was kind of my interest, but I didn't know what I was going to do. So I did take a lot of classes in the department. Started out more in a lot of foreign affairs, but I also got into the politics department. And here I took a few classes with somebody you may not have heard of, a guy named Larry Sabato. No one's heard of him, okay. So, and he ended up being my undergraduate advisor while I was here. Took his campaigns and elections class, learned a ton about the political world, learned a ton about how campaigns and elections work, how they fundraise, how they communicate, and all of that. After I graduated in '88, I got my summer internship. I was an intern for a member of Congress from New Jersey, a guy named Bob Torricelli. Some of you who follow politics are already giggling over there because he then became a senator and then had his own little scandal and left Congress. Rumor is he's thinking of coming back. I don't know. It's just a rumor, so I don't know. I haven't heard from him in a long time. So I had my internship, and I learned about it, and I found I really liked it. I really enjoyed the work. So I spent a month and a half doing that type of internship, but I also went to intern for a political consulting company because I was also somewhat fascinated with the campaigns side of it. I worked for a company that did political TV commercials. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I saw it. I don't want to do that. That was not the side of it that I really wanted to be on. That was just kind of like too thin in the seriousness of the work. After I graduated, I got a job on the Hill as what's called a legislative correspondent. In other words, I wrote the mail. This was I got that job after working. I actually just skipped something. After I worked for the political consulting company, I got a job on a campaign. I worked for the Dukakis campaign. I was a field coordinator. In other words, that's the person who gets the people to go door to door and make phone calls and things like this in Vermont. I was in Burlington, Vermont. It was so beautiful. I was out there. It was the fall in Vermont. Everywhere I go is like maple syrup and cheese. It was so good. But I did that, and again, I was glad I did it, and I didn't want to do it again. So a lot of people love it. It wasn't for me. So I then turned around after that and started looking for jobs on the Hill. I got this job as a legislative correspondent for a senator from Michigan. So you ask, what do I have to do with Michigan? I have absolutely nothing to do with Michigan. I grew up in New Jersey. I came here to UVA, and I had never been to Michigan. I knew nothing about Michigan. But I applied. I did well in my interviews, and I got the job. Stayed in that for about 8 or 9 months until late August, and then I started law school. I started at American University and plowed my way through law school, but in January or December of that year, they called me up and they asked me to come back to be what's called a legislative assistant. That's the person who works on the policy. The LC, or the legislative correspondent, does the mail. The LA, or the legislative assistant, generally does the policy, or the policies. There's a bunch of people like that in each office. But they said, we're not just going to give you a regular full-time job. We want you to job share. I said, okay. Well, the person who was the legislative assistant while I was working for her as the LC was going to be having a baby. And she wanted to split the job with somebody. And I just stumbled my way into a half-time job where I worked Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, and Friday, and then took my law school classes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning, and at night. It was the greatest schedule because once I would get bored with one or the other, I was constantly switching back. So it was just terrific. I actually loved that. After that, when I graduated, but before I graduated, I added on to the program. So I ended up getting one of these JDMAs. So I also got a master's in foreign affairs. And just to tell you something about how good the foreign affairs program was here, I had already covered most of it. I mean, I had really almost, I was kind of going back over a lot of the things I had already learned, but I ended up being able to combine both programs and getting it done in 4 years instead of 5. So that worked out quite nicely for me. But after I had graduated, I'm stuck with a half-time job and a half-time salary, so I had to get a new job. So I flipped over to the House of Representatives to my current boss, and this was November of 1993. I went over then to be his senior LA to doing foreign policy, which is kind of what I wanted to do. And he was next in line to become a subcommittee chairman at that point, because the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives. Democrats controlled the House of Representatives for many years. You may not remember that. A few of us don't either. But a whole lot of things I will not bore you with happened in the intervening period, and I had to stick around another 10 years before he finally became a ranking member. We had lost the House by 2006-07, and I moved over to the committee staff, where I now work. I worked on the subcommittee for a few years, and then moved up to the full committee when he moved up high enough in the order to become the ranking member of the committee. And that's where I am now. I became the staff director when he became the ranking member of the full committee. And the way that works is, if the Democrats go into the majority, then he becomes the chairman, and I become the staff director on the majority side, or the staff director of the committee. The only other thing I want to say, and I don't want to speak too long because I know you all have a lot to say, why have I been doing this now for 28 years? And the answer to the question is, every single day is different. I do not do the same thing every day ever. Some days I come in and we have meetings with presidents. Some days we come in, we have meetings with the foreign minister of some country. Some day we have meetings with the Secretary of State or hearings with the Secretary of State. And other days we're writing legislation. We're on the floor of the House of Representatives trying to get a bill through. We're in committee marking up or writing legislation. Or, House is in recess, we have to go travel to different countries and go meet with people out there. So I'm in my job because every single day is different. Every single day is interesting. And I continue to like it, as much as it can be very frustrating. And the politics is awful today, but the job is still good, and the people I work with are wonderful. So that's all I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Haley.
So my name's Haley Anderson. I graduated in 2009. So I will kind of start at the beginning. I transferred to UVA from Boston University. So if there's any transfers in the audience, I'm happy to talk with you about that. I started as a second year at UVA, and I knew I wanted to study politics. I love politics. I love learning about it, and I love the program at UVA. I took a more passive approach at the beginning of my studies, and then became much more involved towards kind of my third and fourth year. And fourth year was able to get involved in some more research with one of my professors, who ended up at that time and for a couple more years being the chair of the department. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. After I graduated, I went into the legal field. I was interested in seeing if I could find a career in that. And I worked in a private law firm, corporate law, for the Attorney General of Missouri, for a legal aid firm, and in an academic legal setting. And so I really enjoyed the experience of seeing the legal profession in a couple different from a couple different lenses. And I wasn't able to see myself in any of those offices. I felt like I was surprised by how solitary the legal profession was when I experienced it, and knew I was looking for something else. Though I did go through the application process and took the LSAT twice, so that was wasted energy there. I then transitioned into the fundraising field. I worked for nonprofit fundraising, so for higher education institutions, for Harvard and WashU in St. Louis, and then also for a small nonprofit working in foster care in St. Louis. And what I enjoyed about working in the fundraising field was, first of all, the ability to interact with people, not just my coworkers, but it's a very social job. And then also the experience of working in an office. All the institutions were very well run, nonprofits, and it gave me good experience about how to be a good coworker, how to be a good employee. But I kind of found out after a couple years I really wanted to work with a more vulnerable population and be more giving of myself. And I found the field of speech-language pathology. And this is a field where it's a 2 years master's. I didn't have any science background and just did the research to figure out, okay, how do I set myself up to apply to this program? And after having worked in so many different offices, I was able to draw upon my resources to get recommendations. Of course, I can't speak to my experience in speech-language pathology or how good I am at science or anything like that, but they can speak to how hard I work and what I might be able to bring it from an interpersonal perspective to the field. And so that was kind of made a very smooth transition into graduate school, and then subsequently into various internships, a fellowship, and then now to my current job. And during that transition, I was really able to use also my experience of having had to get quite a few jobs in the interim in the legal and fundraising field to set myself up as best I could for getting the right internship out of graduate school, finding a fellowship that then transitioned into a full-time job, and now transitioning in my job, advocating for myself, and ending up in a kind of work schedule that works best for me. And so right now I'm doing actually in a job share position. So it's interesting that you brought that up. And I work basically every other week in acute rehab with patients who've had strokes or traumatic brain injuries. And it's a very, it's with people right after they've gotten out of the hospital, or it's still in the hospital. It's right when they're out of the acute stage. And it's very meaningful for me to be able to have an impact and help not only the patients but also the families in this moment of crisis in their transition from the hospital. We're kind of the middle step before they're able to get home. And so it's I am finally at that, after this path, I have nothing but positive energy to give back to you guys to help everyone find their path and their job like this.
Good. Thanks, Kelly. Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie. I work for PBS. I also came to UVA from the great state of New Jersey, the Jersey Shore, to be, perfectly not snooky. I'm class of 97, and I actually would think I'm kind of the fish out of water on this panel. I actually came to UVA. There was a major at the time called Rhetoric and Communications. I wanted to be in media. I watched so much television. That was like the only clear career path for me. So when I came to UVA, they actually, a year into me being here, they ditched the Rhetoric and Communications major. So I was sort of left going, I'm sort of here, what do I do? So I went in and I became a government major, I think mostly for curiosity. I thought it was something interesting, and I think there are skills that I learned from government that sort of helped me today. I balanced that out. Every summer I did an internship. So I was an intern for NBC, for Dateline, for Good Morning America. I think those internships helped me when I eventually graduated, which was a stressful time. I know for those of you who are coming up and thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to do? My parents were really stressed about it because basically everybody else in a government major had some sort of job. They were all going to be consultants or going to law school or something. And I was like, it'll be fine. It was fine. I ended up going to CNN in Atlanta. So I basically packed up and moved there. If you go into a media job, they need you at that moment. So you can't stress out too much about, I don't have that 6 months in advance, or I don't have that even 2 weeks in advance. They will hire you when they need you. So I moved to Atlanta. I picked up and worked in broadcast television for CNN for a couple of years. I am a huge sports fan, part of the reason that brought me to UVA. I ended up going to work in New York for Fox Sports to cover sports. And the reason I made that switch, I was actually in digital. It was the beginning of kind of like actually the height of the .com. Sort of everybody was investing, and I thought, well, this will be great. And as a female, I was able to kind of break into a very male-dominated business, I think because I was a female. So I taught myself HTML, and I went and covered sports. I actually got to cover UVA sports, which was a ton of fun. Then the bust happened, so then we all got laid off. So that wasn't as fun. I then went to work at Madison Square Garden, who had started up their own website. They have a television network, so they had a companion website. So I worked again in digital there. I covered New York sports, which was not as fun as covering UVA sports, but it was still fun nonetheless. I then decided I wanted to go back into television, and I wanted to live in D.C. That was just for family reasons, wanted to move to D.C., so I just up and moved. Went back to CNN, went back into television. I was a live producer at the time. So what that means when you see any of the stand-ups from the White House, the State Department, those all come out of D.C., and someone's like screaming in their ear, and that would have been me. And so it was a ton of fun. I then went to U.S. News and World Report. I went back to digital, sort of always pursuing this idea of journalism. And then I took a risk. I went to a startup called Revolution. It was created by Steve Case. And effectively what he was trying to do was create a website to compete with WebMD. His brother had died from a brain tumor, and he wanted to change healthcare. So he was doing that from a B2C concept of a website, and then he also had some B2B ideas around trying to improve people's health, just working through companies. The company was a complete failure. You learn a lot from a failure, and I encourage any of you who are interested in tech or media to try a startup at some point, because you wear a lot of different hats. You see it from the inside, and I don't have an MBA, but to me that was really my crash course in business. I learned a lot from that, but then I sort of took a moment and stepped back from my career and said, what has gone wrong here? And basically I'd worked for a lot of different multi-million or billionaires. If you look at that, I'd worked for Ted Turner, I'd worked for the Dolans, Rupert Murdoch, Steve Case, Mort Zuckerberg, and I had gotten to a moment in my own personal life where I wanted to do something a little different and a little bit more mission-driven. So I ended up working at PBS. I started in digital. I actually was sort of a head of a product team. I moved kind of from journalism in my career to more product tech, product development. And then about 4 years into PBS, I was promoted to be in management. So this was another turn in my career, complete left turn. I didn't see it coming, but I thought, why not? I'm one of those people, if the door opens, I sort of walk through it, often not always thinking it fully through. But that risk worked for me, and I've really enjoyed. I now oversee human resources, facilities, corporate sponsorship, and kind of anything else that comes my way. I have functional sort of other responsibilities for driving our strategic plan, doing corporate metrics, doing budgeting, sort of working across all of our stations. So I think for me, as I look back on life after politics, to be the optimist, life after politics is great. I think you learn a lot here. I think you learn a lot from a liberal arts degree. Being that I had human resources, I interview a lot of people, and a lot of times what I'm looking for are communication skills, writing skills, which I think there's a dearth of. So to me, what you're learning here is hugely, hugely important, the critical thinking skills. If I can teach you that, if I can teach you skills, I'm not looking for those. I'm looking for the things I can't teach you. So I would really think about working on those. And I think that your path is so wide open. Don't feel that you're in politics that you have to go one way or another. I think I'm an example of there are so many options and opportunities.
Great. Michael.
So I'm Michael Bluestein. There's sort of a progression on the panel here from more traditional to least traditional. So I'm the unicorn. I will fight you for the title.
All right.
I was a 1989 foreign affairs major, and today I run an investment firm in Northern Virginia, Grindstone Partners, and I buy private companies. I work with management teams, and we professionalize the companies. We deploy capital, and we grow them, and eventually we'll sell them or hang on to them for a while. And so if you ask yourself, what can you do with your degree, I'm probably proof that the answer is anything you want, as long as you can plan out a reasonable path to get there. I think the key career point for me when I look back, I mean, I was most likely not even going to be in this room today when I was 19 years old, because I said I have an interest in business. I'm at UVA, and I've got this comm school application. If I want to go in, I got to do it now, right? It's second year. And I looked at that, and I started looking at the curriculum, and I said, gee, there's just no electives. I mean, you're in and you're voom and you're so targeted. And I said, well, I can still go into business and graduate from the college, and if it's really what I want to do, I'll go back and get an MBA. And so that was the path I took. I didn't even apply to the comp school. So then I looked around and loved a lot of what the political science department had to offer, and said, okay, that'll be my major, and I'll be the guy that adds into whatever cherry-picked comp school classes that I want. And so I couldn't even pre-register for them, but I'd show up the first day and they'd eventually let me in. And so that was really my path here. So politics, it's informed almost everything I've done, what I learned here. And I think the communication skills, the critical thinking skills, I'm going to take a position and I have to defend it, and I'm going to try to tear down that position. Maybe there's too much of that nowadays, but you need to be able to assess. And those were really key traits that I learned here. So I got out and went to go work at a bank. I said, I need some training because I really didn't, the comm school, you can pretty much go straight to Wall Street. But I said, I need somebody to teach me how to do this stuff. And somebody with a good training program. So I went to go work for a bank. I had to really fight to get on their interview schedule. I wasn't an obvious fit when they looked at my resume, but I made sure I networked enough. And I got on the schedule, and I got in there, and I just started talking like I'm doing now, and eventually hit on enough of them and found a great spot for me. And 5 years into it, I said, this is great. I've gotten incredible skills out of this job, but now it's time to go back to get an MBA. I don't want to work for a bank for the rest of my life. It's too big, it's too bureaucratic, but I really know how to look at businesses now from a financial and credit perspective. And so I went back to Penn, I got an MBA, and it was really time well spent. And I can speak to sort of MBA programs, everybody there, like high 90% is switching careers. So, law school probably not as much, right? You're trying to start a career. But MBA, everybody's switching from someplace to somewhere else. I moved into direct investing and investment banking at that point once I got out of business school. And as I was learning to do transactions and invest capital, I would look at all the parties around the table, whether they were the lawyers or the bankers or the capital providers, and say, I like that seat is the one I really want to be in, because after a transaction gets done, you get to stay with the company and you get to manage the company and see if all the plans come to fruition. And so I eventually evolved from more of M&A advisory, sort of doing investment banking work, to where I am today, which is providing capital. And so I sit on a number of boards. We make decisions on creating jobs, whether it's investing capital or we've got to hire key executives. And they're in various industries. They're in healthcare, they're in distribution, they're in building products. It really runs the gamut. One of the largest current investments, it does government services. So now that I live up in Northern Virginia, I've sort of got to pay attention to budget resolutions. And it's important to me if the government shuts down, really for any period of time, because my guys can't work. And so it's really been a unique path, I think, to where I am today. Some of the companies I've actually gone in to play an operating role. So it's usually when I've screwed up someplace, like the accounting is off, and so I've got to go in and be CFO for 6 months. But about 3 years ago, one of the investments was with some UVA alumni, and we looked at it, and they said, "Yeah, we want to make this investment with you, but we want you to run it." And I said, "Well, I just said what I just said. I don't run things unless I screw them up, and this hadn't been screwed up yet." And they said, "Well, let's try it, get it started, and then we'll go hire somebody to take your position." And so we agreed on 1 year, and now we're 3 years. But I've got the guy to take my place, and I think we're going to have a transition. But it's a business that does plumbing infrastructure. It's not sexy, and it's really not that interesting. I don't talk about it at cocktail parties, but it's very profitable. It's very profitable, and it's a really cool business that is doing something for the environment, something for building owners who own all of these incredible structures around the country. And, I'm doing chemistry and I'm talking engineering with my technical folks. I was asleep in some of those classes in high school and in college, but I've had to work to really get back up to speed and know what I don't know about them and then get smart on that. And so to me, what I learned here was the critical thinking, the know what you don't know, sort of where your blind spots are, and fill them in. And that's what I've done in my career. There may be more chapters for me. I love what I do today. I don't even feel like I work because I'm always doing something that's exciting and it's different. But it is a very far stretch from what I was doing in classrooms here.
Terrific, Michael. Thank you so much. I particularly appreciate you providing students with an example of somebody who indeed went into business even though he didn't go to the comp school, because my students never believe me that is possible. Right? And so I appreciate the example. I also appreciate hearing how many of you spoke to the sense of purpose, the sense of mission, the sense of fulfillment that you get at least from parts of your job or jobs that you've arrived at, which is interesting too, because I'm struck by how even for Kadeem, somebody who's been out a relatively short period of time, you've already had a career with lots of interesting twists and turns and plot developments, right? Some of which intersect with an American presidential election. And so I think it's really fascinating to hear how circuitous these routes can often be, and how for so many of you it's a combination of careful planning and diligent keeping your nose down and following the path, and something I never expected, luck, serendipity just buffeted me here. I think it's useful for people to hear that. So I want to give you a chance, each of you a chance to expand on that, but also respond to one quick question that I have. Jamie spoke about a particular piece of advice, a particular set of skills. Learn how to write and communicate. So I want to go down the line and just hear if you can give every student here one piece of advice as they begin this, what will for many of them be this twisty, turny, circuitous career path. What should they know now? What's the one piece of advice you could give them now? So I don't know who wants to begin. Haley, you got something for him? No.
I don't have anything yet. Sorry.
Just
Anyone?
go. I like going first now.
Oh,
Now you're good. Now you're
Now
good.
so I want to go first. All right.
They'll have better answers for you, hopefully. But I think the advice I would give is to really think less about what the name of the place you're working or the prestige of the place you're working, and more about who you're working for and what you're trying to learn from them. My first job out of law school was at a big law firm, and what surprised me the most was how different people's experiences were depending on what cases they were on, what partners they were working for. I had an amazing experience working for a woman. Her name was Beth Wilkinson, and she's like a very prominent trial lawyer. She actually was the prosecutor for Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. And so I worked with her as a first-year lawyer and was working on trials and, getting to just travel around the country with her, we did a trial in St. Louis and a trial in Philadelphia, and it was awesome. And then I had friends who were working for other partners who had different practices that I had no interest at all in working on. And a lot of that was just, I didn't seek out to work with this woman. It just kind of was she needed a first-year associate, and I just started a week earlier. So it's hard to be strategic about that because sometimes you don't have any control over who you're going to work for. But to the extent that you can find someone that you interview for that you really connect with and you think this is a cool person that I want to get to know, I think that makes a much more of a difference than say working at, I don't know what the cool jobs are now, Google. If you work at Google but you're doing, I have friends who work at Google but they're in departments that are really boring and they don't like their jobs. So, yeah, they get to like free lunch, but I mean that's not. I don't know. That gets old fast.
Gets old fast.
Yeah.
I'll make three, if that's okay. I just wanted to expand on the points about communication and writing. First, communication, you'll be doing interviews and meeting people and interacting and networking. Just a couple of key things to remember while you do that. First, look people in the eye. Communicate with them while you talk to them. Be interested, right? That's what somebody will see, that you're engaged and that you care, and they're going to engage with you because of that. Second thing, with writing, your writing probably is improving as you do it here, but your writing will continue to get better as you do it after you leave here. And I'll give just one example. A few years back, we hired a speechwriter to be our communications director on the committee staff. He was a former speechwriter for Secretary of State Clinton at the State Department, and oh my God, he was good. Every day I watch his writing and I learn from it, and I see the different techniques he uses. So the other point I wanted to make on this was pay attention to the writing around you that you think is good and see if you can absorb some of those techniques. Final thought about what can help make someone successful. You may have heard this already. Grit. Somebody could have straight A's and not have that ability to stick to it and to stay with something and make it work and have the determination to see it all the way through. The person with the grit is the one who's going to be successful most of the time. So stick with whatever is your passion and whatever your interest is.
All right. Well, I'm glad Kadeem went first because you gave me kind of a hint at what I wanted to touch on. And Jason, your advice, now I'm kind of like absorbing it, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to take this on. I've got that grit. So what I want to comment on is the idea of kind of tagging on what is the right workplace, and something that I felt a lot of pressure about early on, which was that idea of how long you stay in a job and how that stressful period of I don't have a job and I think I know what I'm looking for, but nothing's coming. How long do I wait? I think it's a balance, but I just want to give the advice of really, like Kadeem is saying, feel like you have a good understanding of what the workplace is like. I haven't actually done this myself, but maybe even asking if you can, for the interview, stay for the whole day if they didn't already offer that, shadow some people, get a sense of kind of the environment, because I think that really, even if you like the work, if there's a transition in the management, if there's some other things that are going on in the workplace that can impact your job satisfaction, which tags into the other piece I wanted to mention, which is that if you don't like it, it's okay to leave, but when you're kind of in that period of maybe unemployed and trying to find the next job, not just jumping at the only job that's available, but jumping at the right job, because moving jobs is onerous and it's hard, and you will inevitably lose some capital that you have spent at that workplace. And so it's I want to give you guys the confidence to kind of trust your instincts on that and just gather more information, and take the time that you need. I know how hard that is, but that would be kind of my perspective. You can always argue the flip side, and I can probably do that too, but that's what I wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I talk to sort of people who are earlier on in their careers, I ask them a lot, what drives you? Like, what is it in your passion? I think that people your age, or if you're sort of newly out of college, you get sort of inputs from like what's cool from your friends or what your parents want you to do. That is a huge mistake. It is your life. Make your decision. And you may not do the glamorous job, and you may not do whatever it is that somebody dreamed for you, but again, it's your life. And you're all going to be driven by different things, and you may be driven by different things as your life progresses. Life sort of happens to you. I moved for various reasons. I actually am driven by space. Like, I like to live in a certain place. I lived in Manhattan for 2 years, and I could no longer put up with living in 200 square feet for like $1,500 a month. Like, that just was something that I couldn't put up with, so I wanted to move. Mission became more important to me later on in my life, after I'd been in sort of the corporate world. Some people are driven by money and title, and that is not wrong. It's just be authentic to yourself, and really go with that. And I would say, and I'd add, just network. I think the best way to find jobs, or even just be inspired by different types of opportunities, is just to meet and network with a lot of different people. Get on LinkedIn, read articles. Like, just you're all curious people. That's why you're at UVA. That's why you're at such an outstanding school. Leverage that curiosity. Meet and greet and find. And I'm just honored that you came to an event like this. Just keep that up, because I think that's hugely important, because you'll get inspiration from everybody you meet, and we'll get ideas of what types of companies you can go in there. There are a million different paths for you, and sometimes that can be daunting, but at the same time that can be really energizing and exciting.
So I agree with all that. Everything they've said. Two things I'll add, though. I mean, it's absolutely your path, and so the scary part is you've got to find your way and find your passion and what really floats your boat. If you're in a position, and you will switch jobs, it's not the end of the world, and it's really rare to be in one job. In fact, someone would say, what are you just settled for? What are the odds that you'd find your permanent job right off the bat? It's low odds, and so you ought to think about, how do I improve myself and where am I, and is there a better spot for me along the way? But to me, don't stress out that, I haven't moved in 3 or 4 years. I haven't switched jobs in 3 or 4 years. Because as long as you're adding skills and you're putting things in your toolbox that are useful, you're not wasting time there. And presumably you're drawing an income. You don't have anxiety that you've got to just switch for switching's sake. If you're building good skill sets, and as I think back in my career, I've always sort of developed skills to allow me to swing to the next rope that happened to be coming by at the right time, and I'm able to make the jump sort of with some credibility. And so I think that's important. Think about, what am I learning? The other piece of advice, whatever your job is, think about what your boss's job is and your people around you, and understand your context, and manage upward. And that's not talk back to your boss. That's, I need to understand what he or she is trying to do, and how can I make sure I help them do that and help them be successful. And I remember my first job out of college was with a bank, and we would meet every week with a young guy, so at that, he's maybe 28 years old, and we would talk about whatever loan was among the 10 that we were supposed to have that week. And it was really more for our benefit, but we'd talk about it and tell him the risk and so forth. And he did that with the whole training class. And then he would go to the committee with all the board members, and he'd have to present it all. And like a week went by, and his meeting was on Friday, and he never got to me for me to go in and talk about my loans. I did know it was more for my good, but I said, wow, that's tough. And I saw him on the way to the meeting, and I handed him the summaries of all of my loans with 3 talking points by each. And I just handed it to him as he went in. He looked at it, he's like, oh, thanks, because he was just going to wing it. And he walked in there with him, and afterwards he said, most kids would be like bummed that I didn't give them their 30 minutes with me this week so they could have airtime. All you cared about was that I had what I needed to go into committee. And it was a great lesson to me. I could have gotten fired, but it went the other way. But it wasn't clear to me at the time. But just understand your context of what you're doing and manage it. And it wasn't about me. It was really about him. But I made more of an impression just by handling it that way than otherwise. And so I would add that as you got a lot to think about as you find a job and you're in your first job. But those are, I guess, some tips from all of us.
Wonderful, and I really like hearing from all of you that developing skills of all sorts is something that you never stop doing that, right? You're never finished. All right, I've got my communication skills, I can stop now. And I also like, as much as important as I think that is, I think it's also important to hear that finding your passion is something that you don't have to have completed by the time you are on the job search, right? Like, that's a lot of pressure, finding your passion, right? You're 20 years old, 22 years old. Holy moly. So it's great to know that you actually get your whole career to continue to look and find and rediscover your passion. All right, let me thank everybody on the panel, but I'd like now to open things up to questions from you all. Questions, comments? You got some great resources here.
I guess I'll take it. Depends how involved you actually are in it, but let's assume that you're really involved and that you had something lined up, you had a pathway you were expecting. It's brutal. I mean, it can be brutal for the next few weeks, even few months. I knew a lot of people who were on the Clinton campaign, and it was really tough for them. Even those of us who weren't on that, it remains tough to this day. But you pick yourself up, and you start looking around, and you do all the things that the panel was talking about, and all the things that you know, and you start networking. You find out where you can go with the skills that you have. Some people will have jobs that they're able to stay in which case, you were hoping to go somewhere, but at least you have your feet on the ground and you're safe. Other people won't. And you have to just look for the open doors, find the thing that you want to do, figure out whether this is still the pathway that you want or this is not, and proceed that way. It's not easy. It is ground up. It is pounding the pavement work, but people do it, and they do it successfully. And I've known a lot of people who were involved in that campaign particularly, and others that have lost, that are now doing very well, successfully employed, happy, in good jobs. So it's not the end of the world. The other point I'll make is that people sometimes look at me and say, wait a minute, your boss can lose every 2 years? Are you nuts? What are you doing? How do you stay with that? And I look at them and say, well, the vast majority of members of Congress don't lose. And the ones who are threatened, you kind of know about. You know who's in a marginal district and who's not. So you can actually plan that out a little bit, not 100%.
So I'm a lot younger, so I don't have that perspective, I don't think. But when I was in law school, I worked on a campaign for Ken Thompson, who was running for district attorney of Brooklyn. And he actually won. And that was great, but I was in law school, and I didn't want to work for him right out of law school. But it was always something like in the back of my head, I was like, maybe I'll go work for Ken Thompson someday. So after the election, or my plan was always, if Hillary loses, this is once I knew Trump was the nominee. If Hillary loses, maybe I'll go back to New York City and I'll try to work in the DA's office. In the fall of last year, Ken Thompson died. He just died of cancer randomly. It was very surprising. So I think the lesson I took from that whole fall, where it was a lot of surprises, and that to me was much more, this guy, no one expected the district attorney of Brooklyn to just die randomly. I just think the lesson, I think it's a hard lesson for younger people, I guess, is just there is a lot of uncertainty in life. And I think one mistake that people make, especially people who go to law school, where law school you're forced, I think, a lot of times to make decisions very early. So you have to do an internship at a law firm a year before, and you get the offer at the end of your internship, and then that's where you're supposed to go a year later. So you're basically making job decisions a year in advance. There's another thing in law called clerkships, where you work for a judge. I got offered a clerkship with a judge in 2014 for 2017. So basically, I had to make a decision about what I wanted to do 3 years later, and I turned it down because I said I can't commit to something 3 years later. Now, and here I am in 2017. I'm like, It would have been great if I was clerk. But you just don't know. And so I think, I guess the advice I would have is, the things that you care about, if they're political, you can always work on those things, and you can always do things outside of your job. So, I still am passionate about criminal justice reform. I still will volunteer. I still do public defense work at my law firm. Like, I will always work on those issues because I care about them. And just because I'm not working for the district attorney or I'm not working in the White House doesn't mean that I don't have the opportunity to continue to pursue those interests. And I think, this is my hope, you've proven it, I guess, with your career, is that it'll work out eventually. Like when I was in college, George Bush was president. And, Obama was running, and I remember having conversations as a first year and being like, there's no way he beats Hillary. And if he does beat Hillary, he'll definitely lose to McCain. And then he wins, And I have friends who went out to Iowa in 2008. And one of my good friends, he was a UVA grad. He should be on the panel next year, maybe. He ended up being a speechwriter for Obama. Worked in the White House for 6 years. Now he does government affairs for Uber. He might be leaving Uber now. But anyways, in any event, he had this amazing career, and he just went out on a lark because he liked Obama's platform. So, don't be so strategic about it. Just kind of follow your heart and your passions, and it'll work out eventually.
I can start that. I think that I think the follow-up is the most important. I would say LinkedIn is a great place to go. You'll have this UVA alumni network. I have literally had people email me through LinkedIn to say, hi, I'm a UVA alumni. Would you mind speaking to me? And I always do it because, I think it's that UVA piece. So find a connector, find something that is a bonding, and then reach out to that person. And then I think the best way to network is just keep, if you have the one meeting, just keep it going. Just drop them notes every now and again. I love when I hear from people who says, oh, I'm doing this now, or, it's coffees, it's that kind of thing. I think when you network, sometimes people get intimidated, if you're reaching out and saying, hey, I want a job at PBS. I can't promise everyone a job at PBS. I'd love to. But I think if you reach out and say, hey, I just want to learn more about your company, learn more about what you do, here's what I'm interested in, ask questions like, what companies do you know of that I should look into? Can you connect me with somebody? Now you have 4 people on this panel that would connect you, that we all have networks, right? And so that is just a compounding effect.
Yeah, I did it before social media, and there was no email, so
What?
none of that happened. But I think that's great advice. But the best time to talk with somebody at network is when you're not asking them for a job. Right. Maybe it's, can you make a referral? Maybe LinkedIn shows you who their friends are and their contacts are. Can say, hey, I'm an alumni. Can you introduce me to so and so? Or I want to just bounce a career idea by you. It seems sort of nutty to me, but do you have a few minutes for that? And so, to me, that's the best time to really talk to them. They're like, okay, they're not going to ask me for anything other than maybe to make a phone call or to do an email introduction. And it just sort of gets you in. And they get to, we all want to help young people sort of rise and figure out what their niche is. People have varying levels of available time for that, but I would just keep that in mind when you're contacting people. Be clear on what you want, and try not to make it, can you hire me for the summer?
Right. Yeah.
Every time.
I think it certainly can be part of kind of know what you don't know, as a frame of reference to think about the informational interview. So to help kind of steer away from the idea of, I see this person's job, and you can think very literally, thinking I like what they do, I want to do what they do. Thinking about it more broadly, what don't you know about what they do? What are you curious about? What are, maybe that person is at a more senior position. You can ask about entry-level positions based on where you are in your career. And so thinking about, kind of brainstorming those questions about what you're curious about, and really driving that informational interview, I really recommend. I think more kind of practical advice towards that end is that you have an excellent opportunity to practice that skill while you're here at UVA. Some of my best kind of informational interviews or networking that I did was when I was up in grad school at BU or some of the other academic institutions at the graduate school, and just, I was a little more focused, and so I felt more effective with my informational interviewing and saying, I've got this idea of the patient population I want to work with. This is what I'm interested in doing with them. What do you think about it? But I talked to someone in the business school. I reached out to professors. I reached out to practitioners, and was really just gathering information. And I think an academic setting is a good one to do that in, because people do have more time and they have that natural space for the students. So I would really encourage that if there's something that you're interested in. I think I'm kind of just drawing upon, so Paul and John, you jump in if you think of anything, but things like the Miller Center have, practitioners who are affiliated with them, if you're thinking not just talking to people in the academic field. Or I know that Jason does some work with the Career Center, and the Career Center has a lot of connections in that way to really get that practice with the networking. But I think I can't say enough about it. It's how I got, just getting your foot in the door. It's how you get jobs.
Jason, you want to say a few words about your work with the Career Center?
Sure. I'm on the advisory board for the Career Center. And you all, since you're here, I assume you all know what the Career Center is. You've probably been contacted by it, or you've been in touch with them. I have no idea, because I don't see any of this, so I don't really know. But they're located right down the hall over there. Those of us on the advisory board each come from a variety of fields, and we on the advisory board try to bring to the alumni grouping the expertise coming from our field. So we have people who deal in the medical field, the financial sector, the government sector, which is very large in our area. So there's a number of us from that, but also people who deal in media and engineering. And so so we try to bring the different approaches when it comes to looking for positions and hiring and career tracks to the advisory board. And then we and the staff of the Career Center come to all of our meetings, so we then get to share our experiences with them, and they get to bring that into the work that they're doing with you, so they know the trends that are taking place in each industry and are able to provide that all to you.
Thank you, Hannah. And just to emphasize, those both mentorships and resources and networking, that's good for job searches, but it's also good for internship searches. Right. Terrific. Great. We have time for a couple more questions.
Can you say one last thing?
Yeah, please.
So I feel like people I remember in college always being so stressed out about networking and job search stuff. And I think one thing to remember and to remind yourself is, at the end of the day, it's just as important just to do well in school and just stay on top of the things that you do in your everyday life. And because if you go into a job interview and you've been excelling in your classes, you've excelled at every internship you've ever had, even if it's not a fancy internship, that will go miles to getting you whatever job you want in the future. Pretty much, I didn't do much networking and things like that in college, but I was able to get jobs just because I had done well at UVA. And it's the same, I look at my friends in law school, the people who were top of their class in law school, they never really networked because people came to them for jobs. Another friend of mine who was also a politics major, she went to Columbia and was top of her class, and then she clerked for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she was never a networker. she was just someone who like worked her butt off in law school.
Can
And
I just
so-
add to that? I think
Yeah.
it's also it doesn't have to be so formal. It's just like a friend of a friend. So my first job at CNN I got because one of my friends here, her sister worked there, and so I said to her, I was like, oh hey, your sister, can I call her? So it didn't even require this big major thing. It was just a buddy, right? And
Yeah, I think we need to come up with a different word than networking.
yeah, it sounds
Because
so.
networking sounds
yeah.
like scary, and it's like, well, how do you network? I don't know how to network. Everybody else is networking.
just talk.
I think we should call it T&L, talking and listening,
Right,
right?
right,
Because
right.
y'all know how to do that already, right? And
Socializing,
that's
yeah.
really what it is.
It's like the best advice I've ever gotten is just be nice to people.
Yes.
Like if you're
Yes.
just someone who's like not mean and doesn't have a reputation of being mean, like that goes so far. So many people I went to law school with just quickly got a reputation of being jerks, and it didn't matter that they were smart because nobody wanted to work with them. And the legal community is so small, and I think all of these communities are so small
yeah.
that
Right.
just be a good person and it'll work out.
Could I?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add just two thoughts. To just one addition to that, we have for our internship program, we have what we call the NA rule. N stands for no. A is a 7-letter word, and those are the people we will not take. You following me? Okay. All right. So I mean, it's like this is the unwritten rule. The NA rule applies to anyone for that. The other thing that just for this talking and listening stuff that you're going to do, one suggestion is different industries, different professions, different sectors look for different things in resumes. I would encourage you to bring one with you, show it to a person or two in the field, and say, "Is this what people are looking for? Am I hitting the right points? Is there anything else I should add?" And no pride of authorship in the thing. Make it as good as you can to get the profession. And the hardest thing to do, I remember when I was writing resumes at this age, was I was saying, yeah, but I need to have that in there. It's so important about me. Cross it out. If they say it's not going to help, all it is extra words that's going to keep the employer or the important person from getting to the important thing for hiring you. So I would suggest that.
Another question.
You're all very successful people, and I sometimes get concerned that younger people, or not so young people, think that success in a macro sense means success in a micro sense, as if life is a high wire act, and a single misstep ruins your life. That's just not true. We know it's not true. So I wonder if I could put you on the spot and ask you about a mistake you've made, or let's say it's a mistake someone you know has made, and what you
About a friend.
or that person, a friend, you have a friend, learned from the mistake and recovered and got better. So, just a very open question. I'm just wondering.
I mean, I've made my share of bozos in my time. I'll give you just one that happened. Honestly, this was somebody in my office, not me, but I've done it. Everyone's done it. Just the other day, she's bright, one of the best staffers we have, knows her issues, cold. She replied to all.
Oh.
All right, we've all done it, and she turned all bright white. She didn't say anything terrible, but it was a little bit, and it was just, but everyone around her, even the people who got it and knew it wasn't supposed to go to them, and it was written a little bit, a little too far, all wrote back and said, "Don't worry about it. We all do it." So it happens, and when it does, you feel like your stomach just hits the floor, and you get past it.
So the mistake I made, so I was working at a law firm. I'd been there for about a year and a half, and I had just gotten the job to go to Harvard. And so this was like January, and I had like 6 months left at the firm. And the mistake I made was, in my head I was like, I'm leaving in 6 months, never coming back. So if I'm honest, and I can be now that I have a job, I kind of was lazy the last 6 months. I really wasn't, I just kind of phoned it in because in my head I was like, I don't really care about this job anymore. And then the election happens, and then I thought I might go back to New York, where I'm from, but now I wanted to go back to DC for personal reasons. My girlfriend's there, but and then I'm like, well, maybe I do want to go back to my old job, and. No one had ever said anything to me while I was there in my last 6 months. But I go back, I call them, and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for jobs in D.C. And they're like, oh, we have an opening in our New York office, but, I don't know that we have any openings in D.C. And I knew from talking to other people, well, you just hired somebody, 3 weeks ago, and, the firm's doing well. I can see your, profit and loss statement. And so... no one ever says this to you directly, but I kind of got the impression that, it was this person doesn't work that hard. Why would we hire them back at a higher salary a year later? And so I guess the lesson for me is that even when you're about to leave a job, I think a lot of people do this. I have tons of friends who've been in this situation. Just because you have a couple of months left and you think you're kind of on the way out, that don't kind of phone it in. Because, people remember kind of the last thing they got from you, and things change. A lot of the people I worked for who liked me left the firm in that year that I was at Harvard. And so all the people that I thought were going to be the advocates for me, they weren't there. I mean, it worked out because they advocated for me to get a job at another firm. But, I could have avoided that situation just by either quitting earlier, which would have been hard financially, but probably is what I should have done, or working hard and just sucking it up. To your point about grit earlier. But just being lazy and thinking oh, it'll work out later, don't do that. Because it doesn't matter how nice you are and whether people like you or not. It's a business ultimately, and so people might like you, but they're not going to hire you back if they don't think you're going to work hard.
Yeah, I definitely think how you leave a job reflects well, and as Kadeem said, these are very small industries, and particularly if you're in an area like Northern Virginia, even when you think New York, oh, it's New York, those industries are very small, and everybody kind of knows everybody. And as I watch people sort of leave, I think it's in how you leave. I don't know if it was a mistake, but when I left the job at Fox Sports, because we all got laid off, so you had to, I had to take a next job immediately because I was sort of running out of severance and I had to take a job. So I went to Madison Square Garden, and it was a job I hated. And so you're always not going to have, not every job. I bet there's people up here, there's jobs that you didn't love, and I didn't love it. And I think I probably one of the mistakes is I stayed way too long. And I think that I became bitter about it. I became bitter about going to work every day. And I wish that I had earlier on just assessed that situation and sort of either made some effect in there or moved on. But I would say those moments are going to happen. You might think oh, you're interviewing, you get this opportunity, and then your boss changes or the company changes, new ownership comes, and those shifts can happen all the time. And you may find yourself in a situation where you had a job that you loved and maybe you no longer do or what have you. And I would say just be true to yourself. Really look at that situation and try to figure out how long you need to be in it. I switched jobs every 2 years for a while, so I think this comes back to a comment you made. It's okay, as long as you're gaining skill sets and as long as you can sort of tell that narrative when you go to another job as to why. But I wish in this particular case, I think it was a mistake to stay in it for so long.
I thought your mistake was going to be that you told your boss what you actually thought of him as you were leaving.
No. But I was a little bit like Kadeem, where I didn't like it, and I think I had let it go so long that I don't think I would perform that well on the job. And I think I didn't burn that, but I didn't walk out with a big flaming drop the mic moment or anything. But I didn't leave, I don't think, on the best of terms, and I don't know that. And as I watch now being on the other side and being in human resources and watching how people leave, it really reflects on your reputation and for forever. I mean, those people will be forever. And the people move around. So don't think you're at a company one day and then you go somewhere else. That person may come along one day and you may work for that person. So that be nice rule is very important.
I think, to me, recognizing it's a mistake is probably the toughest part. The reply all, that's sort of an easy one where all of us would flush and say, oh, wow, I just stepped in something. But recognizing that it's the wrong job. I've made tons of mistakes, and you sort of have to pick yourself back up and move on and really keep it in context. For me, between summers of MBA school, I went to Wall Street and I worked at an investment bank. I'm like, I'm a non-com school. I'm here, plant the flag, and it was like it wasn't a very fun job. It was like 2:00 one morning, and I'm waiting for a presentation to come back out of there was like a word processing pool, if you can believe that. It wasn't that long ago. Word processing pool, and I'm supposed to edit, and it's my job to make sure there are no mistakes in this thing. And I looked up and I was like, this sucks. First off, I'm sitting here twiddling my thumbs in the middle of the night. And then I look at the managing director that was next to me, and he was talking about how he had missed his little girl's birthday party that afternoon. And I looked and I said, well, first off, I don't think I need to be here, and I know you don't need to be here. But what kind of role model is that? It wasn't aligned with my values, and I just said, I don't want to be that guy, and I don't want to be the guy sitting here, in 5 years thinking the same thing. And so for me, it was easy because it was a summer job on Wall Street, and there was a natural break point. But I really had to reflect sort of what parts didn't I like about it, what parts were the mistake. So I liked the industry. I didn't like having such a big bureaucracy that the low man of the totem pole was literally looking for commas and adding columns and numbers to make sure they foot. I liked the industry, but I didn't want to do it in New York, and I really wanted something that wasn't 120 hours every single week. And so I changed my search based on that. But it's not always obvious it's a mistake. So ask your friends what they think. Really honestly ask your boyfriends, your girlfriends, your spouses. They're the ones that know you the best. And I've had interventions from friends where they sit down and line up the drinks and say, come on, like 2 or 3 of them are like, you're getting out of this job. It's just we're going to figure out how. And I think that's important. And it's not awful. It's part of your journey. And it's nothing. There's nothing that's beyond fixing.
It would be beyond fixing if we went too far into our flash mentoring. So I want to thank the panel for their insights, their perspectives. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will reconvene in flash mentoring mode. Thanks so much.